It's cold where I am right now. Bitter cold. The kind that gets you right to the bones and makes you hate work even more just because it's outside your house and forget that you ever enjoyed getting out of a warm bed for anything at all. It's the kind of cold that changes you as a person for 3 months before the real you thaws back out and learns how to face the world again. As someone desperately trying to understand and engage with that world, well, of course I hate the winter then. But there's something about it, a little twinge of excitement deep in those chilled bones as the door slams shut behind and echoes, finding the street empty and silent save the wind howling through almost dead trees. Walking down the street, accompanied only by the crunch of snow packing under my steps, and doing so for tens of minutes at a time in the middle of the city, it's as if the world has shrunk down, receded from itself, and around me instead, shape-shifting from unintelligible mass of anything and everything all of the time into simply this, into a space for me. This feeling is peace in destruction or desolation in almost apocalypse. But there's a shame that comes with this as well, as I'm playing make-believe in my head, a hero fighting against the forces of nature itself. Families are losing their savings to energy costs, the elderly are probably struggling just to move, and the most unlucky abandoned of our society are the closest to death that they'll be. This is a horrible, awful time of year. And yet, even experiencing a small share of that myself, I still delight in this desolate world it creates. I might even desire the apocalypse if it would come. After all, some of my favorite stories of all time entirely depend on that feeling, on the vibes of loneliness and pain, and yet importance, control, and even hope which is found from those. And so that's what I wanted to explore here today. Why do we desire a world which is ending, which hates us? What is the allure of the apocalypse? Vinland Saga seems like an odd place to start given our topic. It's about turn-of-the-century Vikings raiding and pillaging England, not the end of the world. And given its placement of historical figures to set it on our timeline, it's not like the apocalypse is going to occur. However, our two respective groups do have views, or rather even expectations, for the end of the world. The Danes await Ragnarok, the inevitable end of the cosmos that comes about with untold catastrophe and suffering, the gods warring themselves to death and taking all things with them. There is no set date, but they believe it is an occurrence already fated. And the Christians wait for the day of judgment, where God will destroy this world and bring the believers to his side, leaving the wicked to rot in eternal hell. In some 20 years, 1,000 after the resurrection, it will be upon them. These two views feel like they should be full of doom and gloom, spoken about in somber tones, full of regret for short lives. And while they do feel anxious about their families being split up, for example, it's something spoken about with pride and comfort rather than fear, as they face the inevitable end with open arms and hope. This is why Vinland Saga is important. Why would someone desire this end? The answer isn't very complicated. This world is terrible, a parent which desires its children dead. They face freezing temperatures, crushing amounts of snow, animals yet untamed, and sickness without prevention. They build their own homes and then take the snow off the roofs with a shovel they built just the same. Just surviving every day is a struggle. And these are the lucky ones in Iceland. They accept such harsh conditions in order to get away from the raiding, the pillaging, the murder, and slavery which the Danes export to the entire known world, where you either be it or face it down. And their Icelandic village is still drafted into such wars anyway, so even they don't escape such evil for all their efforts. Hell, even a royal like Canute, the second prince of Denmark, isn't free from cruelty. He's born into a family where his only safety from internal murder is in silence, and even when he does that, he's still tossed onto the battlefield to die and held hostage time and time again. His father, the king, is a wicked man, scarred and weak from his own fights, once killing his father before him to take the crown. No one is safe from this world's cruelty. This is why the people, whether Viking or Christian, hold this similar belief of the world's end, because such cruelty lacks logic. To know a world where you work hard and pray every day and yet still die to the madman's axe? Or are one of those madmen to whom death has become meaningless and so life has no meaning to require logic in the first place? Either way, the world is horrible, it makes no sense, and even more is inescapable. It could never be imagined as good. The best thing a god's will could do is to wipe it away and start fresh, if at all, because there is no fixing such a wicked place. The Christians believe this more, to be fair, but the Danes aren't free from it with their own heaven-like concept of Valhalla. They perpetuate evil, a warhawk-like people who thrive in destruction, yet they do so with the idea that in the end, it will lead them away from this world and into one without such things. Even they, the brutish rulers, seek an exit from this world for something better. The only ones who don't hold on to the hope of legends, of fertile lands over the sea or mythical gardens where heroes rise again, which themselves are just new worlds, new heavens on this earth. No one truly seeks to remain here. Surely, though, some would desire to change it instead, wouldn't they? Well, they wouldn't, because it makes no sense to. If you work 14 hours a day to survive nature, exhausting oneself in tool-making and water runs and hunts, can those remaining 2 hours be anything more than rest? If you're thrust into conflict after conflict, recovering from one battle just as another begins, is there time to hesitate and desire change? When you pause, you die, and so you must become hardened against it. And when you witness so many delighting in this, do you try to take that pleasure from them to become the victim of their wrath? To try and speak to the man that slaughters the surrendering army? Peace has never been an option. When all of these factors stack, when dealing with one means dying to the other two, then there is no will to change the world. All I can do is hope for a second life which is better than this. And that is the allure of the apocalypse. To receive a clean slate for the sins we didn't commit but had to live with anyway. However, it doesn't even have to be the end of the world which provides this hope, but rather it can be in the act of ending itself. Past the initial wave of destruction, we may find something just as freeing as the new beginning. This is the case in Girl's Last Tour, where Chito and Yuri explore a desolate, tiered city. Snow piles up on former battlefields full of destroyed bombers and abandoned arms, while power plants sit stagnant and dark. Apartment buildings are so empty that a couple chairs is an insane discovery, and the few souls they meet disappear off into nothingness, never to be seen again. There is no production, no society, no hope. This world is coming to its inevitable end. And yet, despite this, even the near encounters with death it causes, Chi and Yu are actually quite happy. They bicker like sisters over an odd number of sweet treats, take pictures like tourists in new locations, and even visit the aquarium to feed the fish. Although that's fish singular, the last one since they ate the other weeks before. The way they live doesn't even feel very different from the way we do. I mean, sure, there are still some anxieties, some close calls here and there, but they seem happier than us, stress-free and joyful, even as all they do is survive against an inevitable end. When we so often struggle to exist with so much more than that, how do they delight in so little? Well, it's because every action is pointless. Running into the statues and disrespecting their possible religion, saving the aquarium and its robotic caretaker AI, the maps that one person made and the plane another tried to, well, none of these things mean anything. Okay, they put their lives on the line, risking it all to get on top of the construction robot and prevent it from tearing down that aquarium. And now that caretaker gets to, well, keep maintaining that last fish for as long as it wants. But it's the last one, so it can't reproduce, and the AI can only do what it's programmed to, so once that fish dies, it just shuts down for good like all the others that we see resting there. All they did was delay the inevitable, buying them a couple weeks, maybe months, but not changing the end result. Nothing they do could. What this means is that there's no logic to live by, no cause and effect. Because their lives are literally just survival, you can't say that saving the aquarium is better than building the plane or vice versa, because what does either achieve? There's no metric for success besides waking up another day, no way to compare any life, as they also clearly end just the same, without even someone to carry on their memory. This is meaninglessness in truest form. And that's freedom, because if there's no reason to do anything, then there's no reason not to do anything. There's no pressure to succeed, there's no cost to failing, there's not even a consideration to the future, whether it's an operational ration factory or a good memory immortalized in film, because the future doesn't exist. This is what lets the girls be happy, as that layer of painful complexity to live, where we worry about success or even legacy, or those things feel physically needed to be safe and sound. All those requirements have been removed entirely in the end of the world. Every lifestyle is valid. All you need is something, anything to give it a personal direction and make that moment personally purposeful. And so they choose upwards. Quite literally, they simply pick a direction and go with it, sometimes even letting the wind decide. Life is simple but full and always achievable. In our world, that feels like an entirely alien form of comfort, and it's part of why we desire the apocalypse. We have to justify each and every decision, and then once we do, we still have to see results for it to matter. For example, say you want to be a writer. Well, in this example, you might have to first convince the world to let you start down that path, telling maybe your parents that it's a worthwhile major to pursue, or your partner, or whoever it is, that it'll make up for the evenings that it takes you away from them with. And then, once you get that start, once you grind up the perfect idea in your head, mix it with the pen's ink, and put it down onto the paper, you can only do it again if that one sells like it needs to for your time, a publisher's wallet, and the world's attention alike. The second you succeed, that just becomes the floor and more is expected. The amount of pressure is unending and insane. Contrast this with Chi, who loves the literature she can find, holding it more dear than even basic supplies. She's also a writer, noting down their adventures in her journal as they sit by the fire at night's end. And just that gives her all the purpose in the world. They have to keep seeing things so she can keep writing. Think about that. The simple decision to write with no justification, no goal, gave her entire life direction. And it doesn't even have to persist or pay off. She can burn it for warmth when things get to their toughest, and even though it hurts, it changes nothing. All that mattered was that she did it, and it got her to that point. In short, what Girls Last Tour is stressing is that in this hopeless world, it's the journey which matters, since the destination is always the same. It lives up to the ideal that every single person knows, but we fail to enforce in our own world. It's also a world which is paradoxically devoid of boredom and sameness, which plagues our lives. And this seems to make no sense. So many things and places, so many possibilities have been ripped away from this world, and yet there's no way to feel bored or aimless? Once again, it rests in meaninglessness. Since we are the ones who dictate meaning, then those places and objects' purposes rely on our minds. For example, in the graveyard that she and you find, single objects are left behind to remember the dead. To the people we see crying over them in a montage later, they're the most purposeful objects in the world, the summary of a whole person in the palm of their hand. But to the girls, well, they don't even know that this is a graveyard to begin with, and once they do, there is still no way to know what these objects mean or even what they're used for. A radio isn't a radio to them. It's a weird box with these knobs on it that sometimes makes noises. The meaning and the purpose even is lost in the past with the generation which once held them. And so, the world has not had possibility removed, but rather it has endless possibility. It's up to them to decide what each and every object and place means and does. When they find statues indicative of some old belief system, it isn't like what we know of religions from our past, in messes of thousands of years of good and bad, of rigid roles and expectations available only to believers. That baggage was lost with the believers. So now it's allowed to inspire anyone, even for the uninitiated, for free and without requirement, as they take it to be a comforting idea of hope from the past, sitting there in this temple they have no idea what it actually meant. What was once one possibility due to its history is now any number for them. Or there's the camera that they're gifted, which they fumble about with for days until they discover all its functions, giving them sheer joy in photography, an act that they alone pioneer due to their efforts and not teachings from another, making it a deeply fulfilling act. They're technically the best photographers in the world. Even having to survive on rations is a lot more exciting when you have to try and understand what each flavor is, guessing what old world food it might embody. Cheese is not cheese, it's whatever can be imagined the word cheese means. And so they're never bored, they're never sad, they never have to exist in a role or be put in a box, they are endlessly free. And this freedom is the allure of the apocalypse. From wishing for the end of the world, to its last gasps, and now to how it rebuilds itself, what this all really comes down to is the size of the world. And we see this clearly in Fallout New Vegas, and in fact from its very first moments in Goodsprings. When you start the game, you're shot in the head, put back together by Doc Mitchell, and as such advised to seek out Sunny Smiles for some survival tips in the game's tutorial. Clearly, she's someone respected enough to be given this task, and she backs it up by helping you out with training and free gear. And if you go along with her quest, where she clears out the local water supply from geckos, you immediately see how she can be so respected, the importance of a single life in a small world. As you reach the well, you hear a scuffle and some screams. If you jump over the rocks fast enough, you'll see what they are, a woman fighting off a few geckos with only a knife. Take too long to respond to that all, and she dies. On my first playthroughs, I never knew this was a thing. But shoot quickly, and you can actually save her. This was a matter of life and death, and it's just a simple part of Sunny's usual routine. If she isn't doing her job, someone actually dies. Her actions and efforts are important and distinct, clearly having a positive impact on her town. Something we hardly get to see in our own world, where we're 15 steps separated from the fruits of our labor and the results. Have you ever actually gotten to see a smile on a customer's face from behind that desk? The other highly respected resident is Trudy, the owner and barkeep of the saloon. During Ghost Town Gunfight, where the town has to fight off a local gang, if you get her on side, you get the most advantage out of any of the optional tasks, as she brings even more of the town's residents with her. This seems almost odd. The bartender has that much sway? But that's the point. In a world this small, she's a lot more than just that. It's the only place in town to relax, the hall for when people need to meet up for serious discussions and make decisions, and actually just the only one you can go to not be alone, since it's probably hosted every event from birthdays to funerals since the town really came together. Because this is a small place which is reliant on itself, the bar is more than a bar. Each role is actually taking on a lot more responsibility, and as such has a lot more personal importance to it. If Trudy in her place is lost, then all of that is lost too, so of course the people will fight with her. This is something else lost in our world, one so specialized that we usually don't even create something entirely on our own, but simply handle one part of it, going in the opposite direction where each role does less and less. It further detaches us from the results of our own actions and kind of from any sense of value. This is something the game passes on to us as the player as well. When you're found, Goodsprings is in the middle of that conflict that we mentioned. They're sheltering Ringo, a trader who was attacked by and killed some of Joe Cobb's powder gangers. If they don't turn over this innocent man, then, well, I'll just let Cobb do the talking.
I'm done being nice. If you don't hand Ringo over soon, I'm going to get my friends and we're burning this town to the ground. Got it?
You are instrumental in deciding this. If you talk with Trudy and go her way, the town will survive and prosper. Side with Cobb and everyone dies except the general store owner Chet, who, of course, they need around for supplies. The reason for this is that it's a video game. It has to reward your actions as the player with distinct outcomes and make you feel good and so on. But New Vegas is also a game which stresses the importance of choice, effort, and makes its decisions realistic. On that last point, it actually makes sense that you can swing this battle. It's maybe 12 people in total, and you put in the time and energy to change it whichever way you want, whether that's armor, explosives, medicine, or just more bodies. The overall extent is so small that a single person really can't change the entire outcome. And then later into the game, when the stakes are larger, like the impending battle of Hoover Dam, the effort needed to change it scales up appropriately. You're not just talking to a few people in town, you are making deals and truces and possibly slaughtering entire groups. To change that battle requires more effort, and that's why I love this game, because it actually scales up and stresses the importance of your actions and all that stuff. Anyway, I'm off script. To get back onto it, and so, we begin to feel what the game intends and what we desire so from an apocalypse. A world where our actions actually impact our own lives, where we feel important. This importance of scale is proved by the opposite end of things with the NCR, the budding government of the West, which is expanding into the Mojave, bringing its taxes, worthless currency, and troops alike. There are a lot of overall examples that show how the NCR is almost entirely impersonal and refusing to address specific situations. Their legislated tax rates don't adapt place by place, which forces out many of the residents they're supposed to be protecting. The Mojave outpost is blocking all caravan travel, even if you only have papers, because of regulations from people who've never even thought about being there once. And their miscommunication with the kings almost turns all of Freeside into a war zone. But the best example is in Camp McCarran, where a husband and wife pair, the former a ranger and the latter's a regular enlisted soldier, both reside. Or at least did. The husband died to fiends, just local kind of warring enemies, and the wife is unable to even get his body for burial because they have booby-trapped it and are watching over it, seeking to kill even more of the NCR with him as bait. Stretched thin on so many fronts and unable to protect even its living citizens, there's no way they can spare the manpower to walk into a known trap like that. They won't trade 1 or 2 soldiers for a body when Nipton and Nelson, towns within their borders, have been burned to the ground and citizens slaughtered. It simply doesn't make sense. And so Morales stays sitting there as her husband rots in the sun. The logic of the NCR's decision makes sense, and that's the point. At their scale, things inherently have to become impersonal. You can't compare a single proper funeral to all the time and energy spent getting back that body without more losses during the middle of a constant war that threatens all your living civilians. The machine functioning in its total is more important than the actual health of the parts at a time. It would even happen to Goodsprings if they grew more. Say they get an actual sheriff, well, suddenly Sonny is less important. And if they get a musician or a comedian, some sort of entertainer, well, then you don't need to go to Trudy's for the radio anymore, and suddenly things spread out a bit. No one is playing all those roles, and as such, grow less important. It's a limited resource. In each situation, there's a set amount of importance, and so the more people you add, the less each one can have, even if the result is greater. This is a large part of why we desire the apocalypse. It shrinks the world, and by that very fact, makes us a lot larger. It's here that we actually turn to our world now and dive into the writings of Doomsday Preppers. I tried to get a decent range of research on the subject, which will be listed in the pinned comment. I ruined my algorithm a bit with prepper content, which won't be listed here because I really don't want hate from specific and dedicated fan bases. And I found a paper that was exceptionally sympathetic to the hobby to explore the prepper mindset. Bradley Garrett's piece for the 2021 issue of Geoform, Doomsday Preppers and the Architecture of Dread. Now, Garrett has a PhD in social and cultural geography and has produced a lot on this subject. I actually found him cited naturally on other articles, but he's often criticized for being unscientific and getting way too close to the subject of his studies. He cites himself and his friends and their shared interests, and in this piece in particular lacks any sort of scientific tone and takes direct shots at his detractors. But this makes it the perfect source for today. It's explaining the idealized version of the motivations that these people follow, so we can see the allure they feel pretty distinctly. From the title, you can guess the main idea of Garrett's paper, dread. This is distinct from fear or anxiety because they are about known things. We fear bears because they can kill us in one swipe, and we are anxious about public speaking because we can imagine all the ways it will go wrong. But when we feel dread, we don't really know why. It's about something unknown, uncontrollable, like the thoughts of a dictator across the globe or conspiracies that one person could never uncover. Of course, nuclear war is the prime example of this, especially in the Cold War, where it really wasn't known where and when it would happen or what would come afterwards. Bless you. The origins of American prepping as we know today stem from this, where in the 1960s, the US government went a different direction from Europe. Over there, where the horrors of war were still fresh, they had the mindset to mandate personal bunkers and new construction, or just to build communal bunkers, which made even more sense, given ones already kind of existing from those wars. While not implemented until 1963, Switzerland required every home built to include a bunker, and Albania built 175,000 concrete bunkers during the Cold War alone, although these were typically just concrete shells to survive the blast and kind of served a more complex purpose with regards to authority and war as well. But you can find anecdotal reports in threads all over, where citizens of Finland, Slovenia, Poland, Norway, and more state that they still have these kinds of bunkers to varying degrees of upkeep. This is honestly very strange to see as an American, where I've never encountered a shelter space like that in my life. Coming out of those world wars an ocean away, we had no basis for them in a more individualistic mindset. Plus, the cost was deemed too great to take on, and instead private citizens were encouraged to make their own preparations. To be fair, there was money allocated to finding spaces which could be adapted into shelters and upgrading them as such, as well as providing them with supplies. However, a lot more money went into spaces dedicated for government officials, and so the seeds were set to have citizens feeling abandoned and take matters into their own hands. And while I hate the typical, almost comical levels of government distrust that US citizens tend to have, we can't deny that this was a true feeling of abandonment and become core to the prepper justification. This period, which is sometimes referred to as the First Doom Boom, is of crucial geopolitical significance because it marked an abandonment of the social provisions of protection by the US government in the context of a potential nuclear genocide. As Lan, Klink, and I have written elsewhere, these bunkers were spaces of exception, where democratic states could morph into autocracies in times of war by making the decision to sacrifice the polis from the space of protection. But this proved was something humans hate: a lack of control. Not only is it the 8 hours of work behind a desk every day that we never see results of our labor from, and not only is it wondering if we're on the right path and if our future will be secure from all this work we hate, and not only is it just the decisions of leaders at home we'll never meet, but also of the madman across the globe who we didn't even have a choice about, who could suddenly shift the entire course of our lives, whatever we did or didn't do. How much of our life's direction is actually ours? As Garrett states, every day we are surrounded by a multitude of choices that seem inconsequential on a personal level and catastrophic at the level of the species. To wish for an end, to shrink the world back down, is to wish for this dread to cease and finally have agency over our own self. And so the next natural step then is to prepare for this kind of situation, so that if it does happen, you can be fully in control. After all, you won't have control unless it does happen, so you may as well be ready for it, right? You can't change the fact that the bombs will fall, but you are entirely in charge of how many supplies you have, or how well trained you are to gather more and protect them once it does. You can be the one everyone else looks to in envy for once. Instead of absolute panic at the end of the world, it actually becomes the thing you're most ready for, a complete relief of the dread you've been feeling and the chance to finally be important, to be yourself and improve. One prepper building a large-scale bunker told me that, "I imagine walking through the doors of the bunker when it's finally finished and feeling the anxiety drop out of my body. I imagine spending time in there with my family, safe and secure, becoming the best version of myself." Another, when questioned about what they might do in their bunker, responded, "Well, you could learn to do anything. You could learn how to meditate, you could learn how to levitate, you could learn how to walk through walls." when you get rid of all the distractions and crap around us keeping us from doing these things, who knows what you can accomplish. The bunker is, for them, both a controlled laboratory in which to build better selves, reasserting lost agency, and a chrysalis from which to be reborn after a necessary reset of a messy, complicated, and fragile world. The end of the world, or at least being prepared for it, becomes a matter of relief and empowerment. Down there, you're free from distractions, all the hustle and bustle of a hectic world which can't even be kept up with but forces us to try anyway, and you can suddenly have time not just to be important, but learn who and why you really are. Something that really struck me in some of these prepper videos I watched was when the host of one specifically was describing getting started with prepping and said something like, "Listen, I know it's hard to get started with this when you're busy with life and work and family, but it's rewarding once you finally get to do it even if you're exhausted." And this was like hearing my own words about reading or socializing or trying to make better videos read right back to me. I want to do those things to improve myself and as such my contributions to society, whether that's my connections or my mind or my future, and so it feels like the world should welcome it, and then it never does. It just keeps chugging along the same no matter how hard I try. It's not even just that I need time to catch up and self-improve, but that even if I had it, it seems like nothing would change. Do you feel like this world facilitates who you are in any way? I can see a hole in the ground and hellfire above being appealing when I consider that. At least I would have one half of the equation at the time, even if there was no one to witness the better self which emerged. But that time could also be for important people in my life. One of the things preppers often do is form entire survival communities, having local meetups, training sessions, or at the extreme end, actually living on the same compound together. Some have pretty odd views that I can't get on with, speaking of the end as a fated biblical occurrence or praising their, and I quote, 1950s style life that surely excludes people like me. But if you're someone who actually fits their mold, this is probably a pretty great place to be. They take claim of their land with camp names and state them together with pride, in little worlds where you know what friendly faces you'll find at a hard day's end. Like we saw in Fallout, they all become a more important member of the community, training the others in how to preserve food, how to hunt and use firearms, or maybe just to grow their own crops, or maybe each one just has the right stockpile of the right kind of thing the other needs. Like we saw in Girls' Last Tour, they share in each other's lives in a tight-knit community where a loss would be felt pretty widespread and where you truly feel needed and known. And like we saw in Vinland Saga, they find a belief which makes the world make sense, putting a logical end to their suffering and their efforts, pushing them forward to exist past it all. In their view, quite literally, past it all. I could go on listing the apocalypse and stories and the good it seems to bring. Ergo Proxy, where the characters only truly become connected when they leave the city, all its politics and hidden scheming aside, and ride out into the wastes to find their own pasts and control their own futures. Evangelion, where the third impact settles and it's two people alone on a beach, and the sounds of rejection and such human choice and importance ring out in a world finally devoid of distraction. Bubble, where a ruined Tokyo is now explored anew by kids who were trapped there, each structure redefined by their choice as they prove their way through these new grounds. From the New World, where villages so small teach their children to cooperate and to love, ensuring no one is alone. School Live, where 4 girls survive the apocalypse with whatever hints of joy they can find. There are any number of stories which use a destroyed world to stress what ours should have had in the first place: importance and community and sense, but has so clearly lost. A world which drives us to desire its own end. However, for as much good as each of these stories seem to contain, if you've seen them, you know they don't end on such a world being a positive thing. This kind of shrunken world, whether that's the entire thing or a bunker full of goods, does stress the individual and their importance, but it's often built on a platform of weakness and selfishness which ignores how possible such things are in our world. We can return to Vinland Saga to see the basic premise for this, beginning with something Askeladd explains to Thorfinn as they sit in the Roman ruins in England.
Time is on your side. You'll grow stronger while I get older. These stones weren't set by the ones who live in England now. They were built by those who lived here before them, but the Saxons destroyed them nearly 500 years ago. And right now, they're on the verge of being destroyed by the Danes. The day might come when I actually lose to you. That's the way of things.
In placing this all within the same statement, Askeladd is sort of extrapolating the end of the world, showing that it happens time and time again on different scales. Every single day, worlds are ending in individual perception, and then across the generations those lives span, empires are falling too, ending the entire worlds of certain cultures. New people are born and new empires rise, and the process repeats forever. Like he explains to an English captain he's torturing, first the Celts were living here peacefully. Then the Anglos and Saxons brought war, and when it settled, found their own peace, which is now disturbed by the Danes, who will do the same. By the will and action of humans, the world begins and ends anew all the time. The issue isn't something about the world then just itself, but about us as well, the inhabitants of it. That some of us, some of them, commit these evil acts that kill the good, ending the personal worlds of peace and the empires of stability. That by their own choice, however coerced by the world and their surroundings, they choose to create the end of the world. The violence is an active decision, a tit for tat into the grave. And then, since it is a choice, we must say the same thing about those who don't actively end the world, but who cast off that control and wish for its end instead. We see this best with Prince Canute. Against his people's beliefs, he is a Christian, devoted in his faith to ultimate good, the same one which will make the world right again. And what it makes him is weak and ineffectual. He's learned to be meek to survive the infighting of his royal family, yes, but he continues that practice well away from it, sitting in a tent and praying as his men are slaughtered outside London. He sits there and prays all the way up until his capture, and once so, never even tries to bargain or resolve the situation in any way, even as he knows their motivations are flawed since the king will pay no ransom for a son he wanted dead. He'll raise no objection to the slaughter of a village in the name of his safety, instead resolve to pray for their souls once the deed is already done. This is not goodness. This is a man with power performing inaction. And he will never take a solid action in his life, because why should he when God will handle it for him? Even more, of course he shouldn't, for what happens is already God's will. The implicit statement is to cast off one's control over making a better world to simply wish for one instead. And while they wish, the evil takes more and more because no one stands up, and the cycle repeats as each side just proves their own mindset. We can make this judgment because we do witness the ones who change the world, namely Askeladd. He hates the Danes with a passion, as they enslaved his mother and then kept him as one too, even as he was half their kind. He despises their bloodthirsty ways, wishing to make real the peaceful world his mother says could exist, where the heroic king will return. He wants nothing more than this world to be made true. But it never comes, even as his mother is about to be slain. No hero emerges for him, and so had he wished, all he would have is a dead mother. So he becomes the hero instead, fighting off the blow with impressive skill to his father's surprise, and even though he lost the battle, this risk still advances him. They won't kill him for insolence because he showed what they take to heart in bravery and strength. He takes those qualities they think are simply power and uses them for safety and protecting his mother. Over the years, he keeps this up, the image of power, but for a different goal, evil in search of goodness, becoming a full-fledged Dane in order to kill them. He uses that trust to tear apart his family, killing his father with his brother's sword and taking what remains of their power once the infighting stops. Sitting atop this corner of the Danish world, the evil is at least controlled. It proves to him that while they can force his methods, they can't control his intent. He can take those actions for himself and then destroy them. And so he pillages and he murders, he cheats and he kills truly kind men. He abuses a child into becoming his willing slave for years on end, ending as the greatest Viking possible so that he can dissolve their world from the inside. I bring him up to further explain why we wish for an end instead of acting as well, though, because he also shows how much easier the former is. Of course, because it's passive, requiring no action of our own. But it's also because the personal cost of inaction, experiencing evil, is easier to deal with than the alternative of action, possibly inflicting evil. It's seen best in killing Thors, a man who gave up the sword and resolved to live peacefully. Once the greatest of Viking warriors, on the birth of his daughter he loses the will to fight and instead becomes a true warrior, fighting the battle of simply living life by his own will and retiring to Iceland. He tries to pass this on to his son Thorfinn, but fails because Askeladd kills him. An emotionally immature Thorfinn, down to simply age alone, can't handle this and becomes driven only by bloodthirsty revenge. Askeladd is trying to make the same world as Thor's, literally, as they each speak of a legendary peaceful land simply under a different name. Thor's does so without evil, not even killing the men who attack him, but only ever achieves this for a single village. And Askeladd does so with evil, but sets the stage for the whole world to change into something better. So who was right? Do we often believe that Thor's is simply because we want to find peace with our own actions more than making a different world? It's an open question. But Askeladd clearly presents both the power of his ways and also why we find them hard to follow, actively recognizing that he could die well before he does any good. And that is a terrifying thought, to die hated for trying to make a better world. But that risk is exactly why he can undertake it. He has all the reason in the world to survive and do as much as possible before that day, since it is so terrifying. The world might hate you when you die? Well, then either change it first, or if you can't, leave someone behind who knows and will, as he does with Canute, forcing the prince to grow into a strong-willed leader. That risk, the reason why we wish instead, is exactly why he doesn't. Of course, there's more, as one has to live with this the entire time they're doing it, not just in moments at a time. It's why Askeladd can say he hates the Danish people with every fiber of his being, but then still state,
In the end, I'm just a damned Viking.
He has to abandon the kind of person he's meant to be for the kind of world he wants to see, and know that when he's dead, he'll be remembered as the exact example of what was wrong with the old one. Even if he succeeds, that risk of being hated will come true, because no one lifespan can create the world he wishes. He has to pass the torch to Canute, accepting that his life will be nothing compared to the king who changed the world, his name never spoken in praise for the peace the people know. And this is confirmed when he's forced into a corner by Canute's father, the king, and kills the man in order to allow Canute to ascend while preventing the death of his homeland Wales, the king's next conquest. Surrounded by all the Danish guards possible, there is no fighting his way out, and his last moments are feigning madness and slaughtering men so that someone else can achieve his goal instead. So that he can be hated, and a royal, a man with better birthright, can achieve his goal instead. So that a man who only became so strong-willed from Askeladd's influence, literally saved from certain death and crafted into a king by his hand, can achieve his goal instead. This is the last note of why it's so horrible. Not only does it cost him himself and his life, but it's all just so someone luckier could do it instead. Isn't that just what we know today? But that isn't a reason to give up and start wishing instead. This path was only so tough exactly because so many people wished instead. Imagine how much easier it could have been if Askeladd didn't have to morph Canute into a king, stealing him from Thorkel and taking him across Mercia and violently forcing him from his overbearing handler. If instead, Canute had had the will to share his kindness from the start. How much more could they have achieved together if that was the opening point? And further, this relationship shows that by acting in service of that better world, even as it seemed impossible, Askeladd was able to share it, to convince people to stop wishing and start acting themselves. He convinces Canute, who convinces Thorkel, and the line will continue, keeping the same will alive and growing in its power. Suddenly, with one of them at the helm of this world's conquest, a better world doesn't seem so impossible. But it always will until someone makes the choice to stop waiting and to start acting. And Doomsday Preparation isn't this. Put bluntly by Garrett himself, in prepper ideology, faith in adaptation has supplanted hope of mitigation. Do you really think that we can adapt if we can't mitigate? Wouldn't mitigation have required adapting to our evolving conditions already anyway? The message I want to pass on is that that is the issue. That the reason not to hope for the end is a rewording of something we have found many times over. If you start to prepare for the worst, then you give up the chance of anything better. You start to make the worst real. Why settle on the world where millions die instead of trying anything to have a world where they don't? Even if we fail, at least we kept the possibility alive. And we know that trying gets easier the more people who do it. We don't have to face all those awful hurdles if we don't have blind faith holding us back. The first step is facing the world we know, not discarding it. Fallout New Vegas presents a version of this tale as well, specifically in the optional ways, listed or not, which you can go about completing the main quests. Whichever path you choose to try and reach the endgame, House, NCR, Independent, or Caesar, there is always a better option the harder you try. Well, I guess for Caesar it's arguably a worse option the harder you try since it's the evil route, but then in that case we're simply flipping the scale because you would believe that worse route is the better route in that case, so it's still trying harder to reach a better outcome. But to keep things simple, we'll use the NCR as an example. In their endgame quest for the Republic, you end up serving under Colonel Cassandra Moore, a woman who is not a great person. She's a military leader, and so what she wants is simple situations which she can address efficiently and with minimal losses. What this means then is wiping out the factions which hate the NCR because they add that complexity which could foil plans and draw resources away from the more important fight with the Legion. And so she will ask you to exterminate both the Brotherhood of Steel's Mojave chapter and the Great Khans before the next Battle of Hoover Dam. I mean, the Khans you can literally just go in and gun down, and the Brotherhood technically the same, even if it's a lot harder because, power armor and such. You could do as more asks without so much as a single word to their leaders. And if you as the player simply follow that main line of the quest and take the path of least resistance, then you get your victory. But you also get the end slides full of desolation and a summary of pain that victory is built upon, interspersing the NCR's already gray ending with, even more doubt. I mean, what happens when your people are the next Brotherhood or Khans, killed just for military simplicity? However, there are ways to avoid this, ways that require additional efforts in skill and exploration. The Brotherhood are desperate. They lost horribly to the NCR at Helios 1 years ago, and have not recovered since. While this bunker keeps them safe and hidden, it's also failing, and all the teams sent out to try and gather information or fix that have died, only further reducing their dwindling numbers. They can't offer up any more bodies to the outside where they have absolutely no friends. There's actually a funny point to proving that they have no friends, which is the first time I was playing this game and got power armor, I had Brotherhood power armor, and so I kept walking onto the strip and getting shot by people and not knowing why, and it was because I was in Brotherhood gear, and if they see the Brotherhood, they are going to shoot the Brotherhood. They don't have friends. But if you find sympathy in this and become that one friend, it's a pretty long series of quests. You're gathering reports and lost expedition teams and components for repairs, which are scattered across some of the Mojave's hardest vaults. I hope you like man-eating plants and radiation pits. But after all of that effort, they'll offer you one favor in return, and enough goodwill that you can ask the Elder for a truce with the NCR, and he accepts. Everything you return to them helps them see that there's much less reason for fear, and much more reason for them to become a part of this wasteland. And when the end slides hit, you learn that they come out of hiding to help patrol a specific part of the wasteland, offering more safety at a lesser cost for the government NCR, even if you get the sense that maybe their perceived superiority about tech could be a problem. But it's a distinctly better ending from going the extra mile. An extra mile that you have to go to live with the result of your own importance, and that you have to give all the time just in case. Because while the previous Elder, or what could be previous Elder McNamara, will accept a truce, a possible new one, Hardin will not. His quest line, which makes him Elder, is a much easier solution. requiring just some reading and an annoying minigame in addition to finding those same patrols, but skipping everything which normally follows to get them in your favor, like all those difficult and dispersed vaults. Once again, to bring up my first playthrough ever, some 10 years ago now, I went with Harden, and I was devastated when I couldn't convince them to make a truce. By wanting to skip ahead, not helping them, but simply getting them in my favor, I had inadvertently damned the Brotherhood for what I felt was the Mojave's best option. It's a point that you don't just need to complete extra quests, working on autopilot and checking off boxes. You actually need to explore them, see them through in full, and if that's the case, then it's for the entire playtime. If your actions are important, then your actions are important all the time, and you have to embrace that since you wanted it. You don't get to rest and have everything still be fine when it depends on you alone. It isn't just effort though, but also active understanding which is required. We see this with the Khans route. It has all the same effort requirements as the Brotherhood, where if you jump through the right hoops, get the right leader in place, they can make a truce with the NCR. But this time the toughest option isn't actually the best. Sure, it seems great because you get more manpower in the final fight, and the Khans can finally start to grow again without the NCR literally killing them on sight, right? But if you've actually paid attention across the game and really gotten to know this world that it takes place in, you'll see that the NCR can't be trusted to make good on those kinds of promises. In one of the earlier quests, Boulder City Showdown, you come across a band of Khans trapped in Boulder City with 2 trooper hostages, and the NCR about to rush in. Hell, the commander even remarks that the hostages are about to be considered as unavoidable casualties. But instead, you can go in and defuse the situation, talking the Khans down and promising them a safe transport home, which they reluctantly accept. And of course, upon emerging with the hostages, the commander tells you he has just gotten orders to wipe out the Khans, whatever you may have made the deal with them for. Simple solutions as always. Now, you can convince him to go against orders without a skill check, but he still questions it. He still questions if those whole lives are worth being chewed out. That's what the NCR command thinks of these promises and the lives of tribals. It's them literally proving that they can't be trusted to respect the Khans in a quest that you are essentially pushed right into and should find. And so if you actually analyze the situation, even if you're siding with the NCR, you should know that this hardest option isn't the best. And if you take it anyway and draw the truce, the Khans are just eventually displaced by the NCR onto infertile, terrible land and suffer more than if they would have just went their own way, where they meet with the followers and thrive into an empire again. It's not just about working hard from your importance, but it's about working smart too, understanding the world you are now important within, because you are going to have wide implications on it, even if you're just trying your best. This is why I take issue with these prepper communities, even as they do seem to be great places for these specific people. Not only do they perpetuate the issues of the Vinland Saga section with an echo chamber, but they end up being spaces of isolation where you have to believe this or be discarded, get out, and of course the world is going to feel like it's impossible to fix if you don't interact with it or its inhabitants. You don't know it well enough to even know if it can or can't be fixed. If you watch these kinds of videos exploring their communities, you'll hear them say things like, I can be your best friend or your worst enemy, or I like everyone, but I'm an asshole to trespassers. You're gonna hear statements like that said a lot that seem to feign friendliness, but until like a certain point. And whenever they're asked about any of their supplies or plans, they will always hide that piece of information. One of them even said that of course you need your neighbors to get through this. They are just as crucial to your survival as you are. But then he went on to say that doesn't mean you have to tell them all about your setup and your supplies for survival. I mean, it starts out so hopeful, a spark of kindness that we need each other to get through this because we do. And then it turns so quickly into deception, a definitive statement that the reason you want these people around is not for community or for betterment, it's for advantage. But then, how can you even help each other if everyone goes under this mindset and so everyone is lying and saying they have nothing? You just defeated your own point in doing that. Even as they get together, the core of the idea is isolation and selfishness. These places do not foster the required understanding to fix a fixable world. And then contrast this to a different video, one which is about some preppers in Sweden. It's a mother, father, and 2 children who go out into the woods once every couple months and basically just work on their survival skills. They have a small supply of goods for 1 or 2 weeks at home. There's no basement full of shelves, no secret hut in the woods. It's basically just a family spending time together and doing a few enrichment tasks. But the most striking is when their father explains why he does this preparation with just his family. Because he says that if something really does happen, he wants others who are less capable to be able to have those social services instead. That's the kind of stuff that these other preppers are claiming to have, but put into actual practice. They're building community by being prepared on their own, honing their skills so that the people who can't, the people who might be sick or tired or old, or the people who are spending every day trying to save this world and as such can't spend all this time on preparation, can survive as well. They know their world and its capabilities, that the social net goes to a certain extent, and while they don't need it now, so long as they act this way, it will exist until they do need it, and they prepare based on the knowledge of things like that. It's proof that there is a healthy way to have this, what's essentially a hobby, a reasonable and sociable way, as there is with all things. And that's why I get mad about it, because these isolationists are just playing reasonable on the surface. And when you dig deep down, what you find is the exact reason why we're in these kinds of messes to begin with. And while we're already going off, let's show how Garrett's own article disproves all those ideas of a better world emerging after the end times. You've probably noticed that Fallout serves as an example both of the new smaller world and of our also currently large and seemingly horrible one. And that's one of the largest points the game is making. War never changes. Humanity repeats the same mistakes again and again, and if a single one of us survives to build the new world, no matter how good our intent, it was from the mind of someone in the old world with the same concepts. 27-year-olds will still think a commune is the answer to capitalism, and 67-year-olds will still think the idealized and fake image of the 50s is what society should be. Then in a way, renewal actually happens as if our species, or at least the globalized version of it, is wiped out. So any fantasy of rebirth is false. And Garrett should know this because he has a fairly lengthy section where he tours the survival condo and interviews its proprietor, Larry Hall. Think of a Fallout shelter. You probably see an image of a corrugated tube dug into the backyard with a couple bunk beds, a shelf of canned goods, a few books or a TV, and movies and other assorted goods. Maybe it's a hunk of concrete in the woods or a sturdy basement under your apartment building, but either way, it is undeniably utilitarian. It is there to help you survive and then make you want to leave it. Now, see what Larry made. Penthouse suites with screens that can simulate the outside, full kitchens and bathrooms just like any good home, a general store with a year's worth of goods, a pool described by Garrett as like a scene from a resort, a bowling alley, a theater, an arcade, and even more available to you for the low price of $3 million. Okay, 1.5 for a smaller unit, you thrifty bitch. This Doomsday shelter is nicer than any house I'm ever gonna own. Hall justifies it like this, here specifically talking about the layout of the general store. We needed low black ceilings, beige walls, a tile floor, and nicely presented cases, because if people are locked in this building and they have to come down here and rifle through cardboard boxes to get their food, you will have depressed people everywhere. You need to encourage people to come down here to smell the bread and make a coffee, to chat or barter supplies and services. Of course, there is some truth to this. A human being is impacted by their physical surroundings. I think a good analog is work in confined spaces, because if you think of an efficient Fallout shelter, that's what it is. You're cooking, cleaning, repairing, and, well, everything in a space no larger than one room with stuff stacked everywhere. As someone who's crawled around under conveyors on a factory floor, I'm willing to go ahead and make this comparison. Now, when you look at jobs which are pretty strictly in confined spaces, things like mining, tunneling, sewer work, and so on, they are highly regulated to keep the workers not just physically safe, but mentally healthy. The government, or the companies themselves, to alleviate the turnover, have to implement some combination of regularly timed breaks in outside open spaces, stress management training with things like breathing techniques, emergency drills for the workers to feel prepared, peer support programs so that someone who knows your behavior can judge if you're okay, and even more. And when they don't, people either quit or die. Humans just can't naturally exist in confined or dark spaces like these when we're born for the sun in the sky. And so there is the truth to what Larry is saying about needing entertainment and a sense of normalcy. But then he says this. People come in here and they want to know why people need all this luxury. The cinema, rock climbing wall, table tennis, video games, shooting range, sauna, library, and everything. But what they don't get is that this isn't about luxury. This is key to survival. Larry, maybe the issue is that while you're bowling another 67 game instead of just reading a damn book, the 100 people you could have built shelters for with that money are dying, Larry. The bowling alley could have been their bedroom, Larry. It's the death, Larry. The death is the problem. I'll be so bold to say that a bowling alley is a luxury when everyone else's entertainment is literal hellfire. This is my problem with these guys. They'll take a reasonable concept which is true and then apply it incorrectly to some extreme situation. Just bring in a TV and a hard drive full of 300 movies. We can do that now. You don't need 2,600 bottles of wine and a pool and a shooting range. The point is that this is not survival. This is the survival of class and wealth inequality and isolation of all of the old world's worst into the new world. This is Mr. House in real life shit, except Mr. House is at least smart enough to make up for being a libertarian dick mouth. This is a rich man who, while everyone else is wandering in tattered rags, while everyone else is trying to rebuild and survive, is below ground living exactly as he does now, waiting to emerge into a space where he can secure class and be king from this stockpile, discarding any rebuilding we do on our own by hoarded comfort. He is making our hope into his world. And so we can't rely on that hope, even if we think it's about becoming our best self. We can only rely on our actions here and now, which he can't manipulate while he banks on the end. This second section on Girl's Last Tour is kind of the weirdest of the whole video because writing the first part on it was the hardest of the video, and this one kind of explains why. Girl's Last Tour is not a story about life at the end of the world. It is just a story about life. It's about the beauty of the human spirit that we carry forward no matter the state of the world, of our world, because we are aware that even if the world is fine, it will still end to us one day when our heart stops. We can never change this fact no matter how hard we try. Our lives are meaningless. But that means that we get to make them mean whatever we want because it doesn't matter in the end. And so daily life, just existing, doesn't have to be so bad. If these girls can be happy in a world which has nothing in it, not even hope, then can't we try and be happy in this one that has its faults, yes, but also has chocolate on demand, much more entertainment than just an old radio, and safe roads instead of precarious bridges, and so much more for us to place meaning within? Even if someone else has already claimed that one thing, there are thousands, millions of options, and the opportunity and resources to create even more. We're not supposed to see this story and wish for an end to the world so that the pressure can be off. We're supposed to see it and realize that there is no true pressure in ours, even if it feels that way and is almost forced to be that way. We're not supposed to see it and hope for the end to meaning that other humans held to validate our own, but to see that if a ruined world has chances to create it new, then any world should. We're not supposed to see it and feel that the apocalypse must come for us to be free, but to see it and realize that this world can be free as well if we recognize its pointlessness. Bring that to the forefront and embody it. Bring everyone down to the same level of nothing, exactly so that they can be everything which they have finally chosen. This is what we have to embody, the nothingness of an apocalypse, but in a world where it never actually comes. One of the standout moments of the anime comes in its final episode. The camera Chi and Yu have been carrying wasn't theirs first, but was passed on to them by someone who was passed on to, by someone who was passed on to, and so on down a long line. When they finally realize how to open up the memory and witness all of the pictures and videos other people took on it, what they see is a summary of human history. Set to Chopin's Nocturne Opus 9, number 2, I don't know if there's ever been a finer expression of raw humanity put to the screen, from a mother and father's love to dead bodies strewn across the roads, a sloppy fully carat to the symphony's passion, overwhelming and interlacing all at once, new and old, but not really so, because each human thing exists in each human time. And although the girls see a world which has so many things they never got to experience, music and more books, french fries and fields full of flowers, they also witness one where towering robots destroy entire cities in mere seconds. So they don't despair, but instead find comfort in what they've witnessed. People across all times have been able to be just as happy as they've been. People in a great world, yes, but also ones in a restrictive, warring, cruel world that killed itself who were still able to be just as happy as they've been. They're comforted because each side would look at the other and wish for some part of it. Maybe those girls would trade the french fries for the stunning view of the stars without any light from Earth restricting them. If joy can exist in all of these places and people's lives alike, if joy can exist in every world, then why should we ever wish for ours to end? And this is where my plea reaches its most painful, for me at least. I understand the desire for the world to shrink when it's scorned you, when people have called you crazy for doing what you think must be done for your life to be right. When people seek to take away the preparations you've made, remove your space and make you live as they see fit, even as you watch them prove the very points which made you do so to begin with. It's painful when you want to believe in humanity, but it stops believing in you. I wrote this video because for months I'd find myself thinking of the farmer in Good Springs relaxing at the saloon, satisfied with his crop, of Chi and you sleeping tight in each other's arms, of Vincent Riel stuck in the wastes and Shinji on the beach, of those sounds of nothing more than waves splashing and the few soft breaths of a human, and wanting to stop being overwhelmed by a world that feels too large and cruel, of wanting the simplicity and the importance and the allure of their apocalyptic worlds. A world where I am not just me, but I am master, determiner of any fate I wish for once in my goddamn life. After months of languishing in an algorithmic hell, of a workplace hell where nothing I did changed a single thing, I wanted the world to change around me for once. But each time I tried to actually put logic to why, all I found was an unforgiving past that was just as unfit for a selfish child who couldn't cope with life itself. A child who wanted only what they hadn't yet found the struggle in and would surely hate once they did. A child who decided that if they couldn't get the world's attention, then it shouldn't even have it to give. A child desperately grappling with their self-worth and not knowing in just how many ways. Yes, the world sucks a lot in many ways. It could use a lot of work, probably much more than we could do in our lifetimes. But I could use a lot of work too. And if I help to fix that world, then maybe I'll fix a bit of myself along the way. So even though it's painful when humanity turns its back on you, well, I haven't turned my back on myself, and I'm a human and I choose myself. And if everyone does the same, well, then the whole world just chose itself. So let's fix this shit, one choice, one day at a time.